Hey, welcome to Scratching the Surface. I'm Jarrett Fuller, and this is a podcast about improvisation and imposter syndrome. Today on the show, I have a guest that I have been wanting to talk to for almost as long as I've been doing this podcast, the designer, writer, and educator Denise Gonzales Crisp. Denise is a professor of graphic design and the director of graduate programs for graphic design at North Carolina State University, where she's taught since 2002. But for me, Denise is one of those people who I first encountered through her writing, which has appeared in all sorts of publications like Emigre, Design Observer, Design and Culture, and Items Magazine, among others. And she's currently at work on a new book about improvisation and practicing within the classroom. So in this conversation, Denise and I talk about why she started studying graphic design and then going to grad school at Cal Arts and what that was like. We talk about how she started writing and the differences between her writing processes and her design processes and where they overlap. And she has a lot of really interesting kind of techniques and ideas of how she thinks about writing. And then we also talk about how the classroom is this nexus for all of her interests. There's a lot in this one, especially as we talk about how she thinks about writing syllabi and structuring classes that I know I got a lot out of. Remember, if you're a fan of the podcast and want to help support it, you can become a member for $5 a month or $50 a year. Members get an exclusive monthly newsletter that features behind-the-scenes content, links and articles from former guests about design and writing and criticism, as well as previews of the upcoming episodes. Scratching the Surface is fully supported through these memberships, so if you like the show, if you want to see it continue and help with its ongoing production, I hope that you consider joining. Thanks, as always, for listening, and enjoy this episode with Denise Gonzales Crisp. Where the term graphic design came into your life. Where did you first hear that term or realize that this was maybe something you could do?
Well, I heard the term first when I was an undergraduate at Art Center in illustration, and
Mm.
I had friends who were graphic designers. But prior to going to that school, I didn't know what graphic design was.
Mm-hmm.
And then when I was there, all my friends who were graphic designers were super neat, meaning very tidy and very careful,
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
I am not.
Mm-hmm.
Not that I'm not,
Mm-hmm.
I'm totally detail oriented, but these were back then you had to make these like really intricate comps, what we used to call comps, where
Mm-hmm.
they're handmade and you have to be really good with rubber cement and stuff like that. And so instead I was illustrations, or I could be messy with paint.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, after going into illustration, didn't like it. Found
What didn't you like about illustration?
too lonely. Like
Okay.
right?
Yeah.
You're sitting alone and you're making these stupid pictures of whatever, how to tie a bow tie, and I'm like, nah. So,
Okay. Okay.
um, so I don't remember when I finally decided that I wanted to go back for graphic design, but I did go back. I'm going to say 89 for 1 year, 88, 89. They didn't have a graduate program then, so I just did a 1 year focus on graphic design. So it was pretty intensive, 3 consecutive semesters, and I got all, upper level. So I sort of condensed an undergraduate degree in that 1 year.
So was your BFA was in illustration then, and then you
Yes,
went back to do
it
that one
was
year? Okay.
illustration with a minor in fine art. It should have been the exact opposite, right?
Okay. Yeah,
So insulting.
yeah.
A minor in fine art.
That's hilarious. Oh my gosh. Can you so I have two questions kind of because I think there's two things in there that strike me as interesting. Um, One that you were kind of studying illustration, minor in fine art. You've and the thing you didn't like about that was the solitude.
Right.
And were you interested in the practice or the work of graphic design when you were looking at your friends who were studying this, or did you see it as, because you kind of mentioned you're like, oh, it was technical, it looked detailed, and you were maybe not that, or did you just see it as something that was inherently more social? This is just something where I can be with other people. How did you kind of what was it that made you go back to do that 1 year, I guess is the question I'm trying to ask.
I think I felt that there was a lot more depth potential
Mm,
in design versus illustration.
hmm.
Um, what I didn't like about illustration, just being sort of like a, you know, regular illustrator, not a super famous name,
Hmm.
was, the insipid assignments that I would get. So I
Mm,
liked the the fact that design was more is more involved with language. I ended up falling in love with typography,
mm, hmm.
obviously. And so I don't know that the social aspect of design came to me until probably even after graduate school, I would say.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, it wasn't. Yeah, and that's as much a part of kind of self-awareness, right? It has developmentally taken me a long time to realize I really need people.
Yeah.
So, it goes from that kind of like I'm going to be the heroic artist in my atelier,
Hmm.
and to, you know, let's get together and make s'mores and drink
Right,
whiskey and
right,
make design, you know.
right, right.
So it's taken me a long time to get there, but one of interestingly, speaking of typography, I realized that most strongly when I was writing that book, because
Hmm.
I was a solo author. We were on a tight deadline. I had never written a book before, and
Mm.
it was I think emotionally very difficult. But So that's part of why too. I thought I'm never doing that again. I'm never doing that alone.
So before, I want to talk about writing in a second, but just to kind of follow up on something that you said about kind of feeling not feeling the importance of the social aspect to it until grad school. Um, can you talk a little bit about the kind of time in between undergrad and graduate school, and then why you get this 1 year kind of intensive, um, why you then wanted to go back to grad school again, go to Cal Arts, and what you wanted from that experience?
Yeah. So I mean, design. Being a graphic designer, certainly, everything I experienced in graphic design, working for an agency, came true. Right. So
Mm,
I was able to work on bigger projects and got into the digital stuff and worked with the clients, all that stuff. Won awards that I submitted to various things. And I just, I think it was the content that I felt stultifying.
mm.
And yeah, I just didn't see where that it was going anywhere. Like I was asking myself, like, do I want to be making
Yeah.
brochures in 10 years? Like,
Yeah, yeah. No, I know exactly what you mean. I mean, that's basically why I went to grad school too, actually, if I
yeah.
really think about it.
And I just wasn't the kind of person who would maybe open their own agency, and, because there's
Mm,
a level of complexity and challenge if you have your own agency that I think could have been very interesting. And that was one of the options. It was either, um, yeah, no, it wasn't. That was a later decision. But anyway, so so I felt like I didn't want to build on what I had. I wanted
mm.
to kind of turn different direction. And interestingly, so there was career, which is, you have this kind of mental model of what that
Yep.
is.
Yeah.
And then there's going back to grad school, end of career.
Right. Yep, yep.
Because that was I opted for Cal Arts, which,
Yeah.
and that was a very part of my decision was okay, I'm never going to work again as a graphic designer, because that was 93, right? And so that was
Yeah,
that crazy ass, art
yeah.
school on the West Coast, or sorry, design school. So, but I was willing to do that because I could see that, there might be something more interesting on the other end.
I mean, I it's so funny to hear you say that, and to think about that that's kind of how you thought about it in the early 90s, because I definitely, in my final year of grad school, kind of had this realization of, "Oh, I may have just ruined." Like, I'm doing the most interesting work, I'm the most kind of, like, creatively and intellectually engaged as I've ever been, but none of this stuff makes me more employable. I may have just torpedoed all of this, and I've talked to so many people who have gone through that same exact experience, that like, part of grad school is that idea of, I'm ending my career and I'm just going to try to start something new has to emerge out of this. So
Right.
it's interesting that it's kind of always been like
Yeah. Well, one of my clients was an architect, and when I told him I was going to grad school, he said, "There's no the ROI on that is
that.
terrible." It's like, okay, thanks.
So did you I mean, what did you think that new thing would be? I mean, obviously CalArts in the 90s, um, we all know what was kind of happening in the air at that time. Did you have were you interested in those kind of theoretical discussions that were starting? Were you interested in this kind of, designer as author, postmodernism? What did you see as next for you at that time?
I absolutely connected with that, and that's why
Hmm.
I wanted to go there. I also had a good friend. I think you've interviewed her, Callie Nikitas. Have you?
I have not. I
Okay.
know of her, but I've never talked to
Yeah.
her yet.
We had met. I had gone to what was called Deprogram then in Holland. I mean, it's
Mm.
then Holland now,
Mhm,
in
mhm,
in the Netherlands, and that was a 4 month, really amazing, life changing trip. Um, so got very connected with what was happening in the Dutch design world.
mm.
I met the very young Mavis and Van Derzen.
Mhm.
I
Nice.
met Rob Schroeder, um,
Yeah.
Wildplakken. Just the connections we made, the way that they talked about design, that it was so much. It was just sort of part of their life, and there was space for that. That, in other
Mhm,
words,
mhm.
people in the Netherlands know of design,
Right.
and so, so I think it was that trip coming back. And also, I had been exposed to Emigre actually much earlier, 85,
Mm,
86,
mhm.
and I thought, "This is just remarkable." It's the kind of thing you
Uh-huh.
look at it and go, "Are they allowed to do that?"
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Um, so I think I was very much into that sort of strain, if you will,
Mhm,
because I had been to I've been to the Netherlands, been exposed and very interested in Emigre, became educated about Keedy and Fella.
mhm, mhm,
I knew Lorraine Wild's design work and book work. She was one of my heroes. I'd applied to her studio when I'd gotten out of, um, yeah, after that year. So yes, I don't think I answered your question exactly, but the point there is I knew what I was getting into.
right, which
Yeah.
yeah, that was kind of basically what my question
Yeah. Right.
question was. And I promise this whole conversation won't just be kind of going through your your career step by
All
step,
right.
but was this around the time that you started writing then also? Because you mentioned the typography book earlier in the conversation, and as I was thinking about talking to you, you are one of a handful of designers and people in design that I was first introduced to through writing. Um, I saw you for many years through the writing that you did, not
Yeah.
through any of the other
Okay.
stuff that you did.
Yeah.
And I'm kind of curious how that all started, and kind of how you think about writing in relationship to these other things.
I did start writing at CalArts.
Okay.
I did. I took a. I don't know why, frankly. I think it might have been a few things. One, and Lorraine Wild taught it this 2-semester design history course, which
Oh,
I
right.
think everybody should. I wish it were all recorded. Maybe it should
Mhm.
be. Um,
Can I tell you something that
yeah.
I've never said publicly on the podcast, and
What?
I might edit this out because I might like get self conscious about it. I interviewed Lorraine about a year ago, and it is the only episode where I ever lost the audio. Like the audio file got corrupted,
Oh my gosh, that's
and we
terrible.
talked at length about that class. Um, and the audio is gone, and so we have not done a re-recording yet. And I'm
Oh,
so embarrassed and so mad, and it was such a lovely conversation. Only time it's ever happened.
that's incredible.
Yeah.
Ah,
Anyway, when you said you wished that the class was recorded, I was like, well, I had a
we
kind of
had
part of
it.
it
It's pretty
recorded. Yeah.
close. Yeah. Um, so anyway, so in that course, there were readings. She lectured, of course, but then there were readings, and then you had to write every week on the readings.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
And because I was in grad school, and because I didn't, wasn't interested in doing research paper, nor was there that called for,
mm-hmm,
um, I started to develop an opinion about the texts rather than just a reporting out.
mm-hmm,
Um, so I used that to, like, I don't know, sometimes I would critique the thing we've read, or critique the writing, or critique or sort of spar with William Morris,
mm-hmm.
calling himself a communist socialist. It's like,
Right. Yeah.
so I think it might have started there, and then I enjoyed it, and especially just because it's a voice, and it's
Mm-hmm,
it's like making anything,
mm-hmm,
like making a design responding to something.
mm-hmm,
And then I took I don't it wasn't it might have been a writing course, or it might have been a theory course in which there was writing, from one of the faculty in critical studies, and
mm-hmm.
that's where I really started writing, because I felt very self-conscious in that context, because of course that the faculty had, remember, had done all the homework and
Yeah.
all that stuff around the theory,
Yeah.
where I was just like, I felt like I was this little, it's like those little tiny dogs that are yapping up at the big Dane, Great Dane. That's what I felt like.
Yeah.
So, but at one point, I was sort of hemming and hawing, talking about a piece I'd written, and he said, "Oh, you can write. Shut up.
Mhm,
Just do it."
mhm, mhm,
So, that was a shot in the arm, and then he served on my thesis, which was a written thesis, but it was a document called graphesis
okay.
that was this combination of design and writing, and playing around with the language, with creative writing, with creative fiction, with creative nonfiction, reporting on what things going on. So it's just this quilt of,
Mm,
I'd say, what was it, 60 pages of
mm,
image and text working together. Uh, Also, just prior to that, I had submitted a writing piece to Ann Burdick's was editing Mouthpiece.
right, I
And
remember
that's
that.
when Ann Burdick and Andrew Blauvelt were here at NC State.
Okay.
So they were editing. She was editing. I submitted something. It got in. That's how I met Ann, and that was a real sort of turning point, because I wrote it, and it was, like, sufficiently snarky for a graduate student,
Uh-huh, yep, as it
and
has to be,
as
yeah,
it has to be, right?
yeah.
And um, and then I was also designing it, and then when I was designing it, I realized that I was designing it kind of in my old head, I don't know if
Mm.
that makes sense. Like, see if I can articulate it. Um, like in a way, the design made too much sense. It was too easy. It was,
Oh, right.
and I remember waking up thinking that at like 2 or 3 in the morning, and I went down to the Macintosh and
Mhm,
I spent the next 5 hours just totally just challenging myself. Um,
mhm.
and so the result is Ways of Looking Closer. That was in Emigre, the first issue of Mouthpiece.
Right. So I it's interesting to hear you say that about the kind of like the where you are writing it and designing it kind of at the same time. And as you were talking about what you loved about writing and this idea of kind of the voice, and that you were forming these opinions, it's interesting that you said one of the reasons why you went to grad school and why you were kind of uh you could see kind of your career ahead of you in some ways and think like, is this am I doing these brochures? That it was
Yeah.
partially a question of content. And
Yes.
did you see writing as a way to, rethink that content? Like, did you see
Yes.
writing as content for design at that point?
Yes. 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 Absolutely. And of course, the conversation then was that language is voice. I'm sorry, that
Y-
visual language is voice. That
Yeah, yeah.
form is content. And of course, I've always said I think Cal Arts. People say, "Oh, well, that's not a research school," and that's nonsense. It's form research, right? It's
Yeah, yeah.
understanding that form speaks, and so to then add on this cartridge of being able to supply the content as well. It's heady stuff. It's very
Mhm,
fun,
mhm.
and so I think that's well put. That the writing was almost imminent because I was continuously kind of not very excited about the stuff I'd have to design.
Right,
Yeah,
right. Do you think this is potentially a weird way to kind of frame this question. Did you think at the time and maybe still today, do you approach writing as a designer? Do you know what I mean?
I
Especially like
do.
having your
I was
advisor
just
your
thinking
advisor
of
saying
yeah,
you can do it. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. No, absolutely. I tend like I can't write things. I can write things in Times Roman 12 point double space. I can do that. In fact, I'm
Okay.
having to do it right now with the manuscript. But
Yeah.
my preferred way of writing is in something that is much more visual. So I'll choose a typeface and create the format, and
Mm,
I don't just open a document and start writing. I create a space for the writing in the
mhm,
visual, so a visual space. So and it affects how I write. So for instance, and that makes me think of a couple of things. Jack Kerouac writing on a
mm,
continuous
mhm.
sheet of paper on the typewriter, or um, uh, John Christopher Jones, the person who wrote Design Methods, also wrote Designing Designing, and in
Right.
that book, he has many. I would call that he calls them sort of, well, they're improvisational, or you set up, they're conditional. So he sets a set of rules
Mhm.
and then writes to those rules. So he might write a quote or something in the middle of a page or somewhere, or he might
Right.
put a
Yeah.
paper, and then he just types around it, writes around it. So that coupling of the visual, and the system or the process by which you're going to write, as well as what you're going to write, it's very rich. And so and then now I write syllabuses um, in sheets, like
Mm, okay.
in Excel sheets. So
Oh, interesting.
yeah, no, they're not Excel, it's Google Sheets. But in
Right.
fact,
Yeah, yeah.
I've been doing this for a while. So what my medium now, I'm designing and writing my courses in spreadsheets.
I wanna talk more I wanna, like, ask you how you do that, but I wanna, I feel like there's a subset of designers, and it sounds like you are one of these people. I think I'm one of these people that um, you're either a designer that kind of is allergic to spreadsheets, or you are a designer that really likes spreadsheets. And I am one of those that really likes spreadsheets, and loves spending time in Excel or Google Sheets. But I've never thought about doing a syllabus in it. Can How do you do that?
I'll have to send you a picture because it's a designed thing. I mean, the wonderful thing is it's a grid.
Hmm.
So
Yeah,
got that
exactly,
down.
exactly.
And not only that, it's a pliable grid.
Yeah.
And so it's fun to me. In fact, I'm writing a proposal right now for Ways Goose, which is in Two Rivers, um,
Okay.
Wisconsin, and that's where the Hamilton Wood Type
Yeah.
Museum is. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
which I mean, I haven't laid hands on a letterpress probably since I was there doing a little 3-day residency, um, which is that was before I wrote the book.
Mhm.
So anyway, my point is, I'm writing something called the letterpress Zen of spreadsheets,
Okay.
and
I love it already.
I'm intending to write it in spreadsheets. I just have an outline now, but my proposal will be in spreadsheets. I'm not sure how it connects with actual physical matter, but I'm going to try to see where that goes.
Is your process in designing and writing different, and how are they similar? Because it's interesting to me to hear how interested you are in the process of putting together the form of the text. Does that come out of, or is that similar to your process of designing? You know what I mean?
Yeah, I'm not sure I'm not sure I could claim a process of either, in the
Okay.
sense that um, where, like I was saying, what that structure is, I guess, is
Mhm.
usually the first question that comes to mind in both. Not so much the structure of writing, but the where I am placing down the words. I'm
Right.
getting better
Right.
at being able to structure writing. To me, I've never, like I was not that kid in college who could do an outline. I don't know how to
Yeah.
do that.
Yeah.
I don't know what I'm going to say yet. How can
Right.
I
Right.
put it
I'm
in
the
an
same way.
outline?
Yeah.
Now I'm better at now I realize it doesn't have to be an outline. It's just sort of capturing, you know, different
Mhm.
thoughts. But um so I'm better at it. But I don't where maybe the crossover or the shared things would be, I'm definitely as a designer, I will just try to make something. I don't sit there and sketch and sketch and sketch. I just start making something, and then
Mhm.
I make something else and make something else. So iteration is really or is a way to get ideas, and I so maybe in that
Mm.
way it affects design for me. Whereas we have this, I guess if you want to say a kind of steps of making. First you ideate, then you iterate. Well, I kind of
Mhm.
flip that over because iterating is a form of sketching and thinking it through. So I iterate and then that gives me ideas. So I would say that's true of writing too.
And maybe process was too rote of a word for kind of what I was thinking about. And I mean, I'm not saying that you didn't answer the question, but I guess what's interesting to me, I've been thinking about this. I just finished a big essay for somebody, and so I've been thinking about how the challenges that I have when I'm designing versus the challenges that I have when I'm writing, the kind of ways I work through problems, where they're different. And in design, historically, I have been one of the always making things and kind of whittling it away, keep iterating. But
Hmm.
in writing, for a long time, I, like, couldn't start writing until I
Yeah,
had a sentence,
I've
or an
had that. Yeah,
idea, and I'd be walking around thinking about it, and it's like, "Okay, here's the sentence that I wanna open with," and then it flows. And with this piece that I just finished, I tried to do that I was just kind of like, I'm just gonna, capture all of this and see much more how I design, and it completely changed the piece in a lot of ways, I think.
yeah. I'm so glad you brought that up because I think you're right. When you're new to anything, right, you're gonna there's going to be that tentativeness
Mhm.
about
Mhm.
laying those first marks or words or whatever down. Um, and that what you're describing, I think, is the realization that you get after many years of designing that
Mhm.
the ideas the ideas will come as you make things.
Mhm.
So,
Mhm.
but as a going to the writing, I think you definitely like well, what you're describing there is probably what real writers do, what I would
Right.
call real writers, right?
Right,
In
right.
other words, their craft is as very much like, it's like um, any creative thing is, you know, that just start,
Yeah. Right,
write it down.
right.
It's a practice,
Mhm.
right? It's not a thing, it's a practice.
Mhm.
So you have to do it not every day, but you have to continue to do it, etc. So it could be that we just didn't come to writing first.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is, and I don't mean to turn this into some sort of, therapy or something, but, in the process of working on this piece, I kind of realized, like everybody, I have an imposter syndrome about everything that I do, but my imposter syndrome when I'm writing for somebody uh, is much higher than my imposter syndrome when I'm designing something for
Right,
somebody. And
right.
it's always been that. And every piece that I write is like, here's the one where everyone's going to realize that I'm not a writer, that that this is the sham is up. I have that in
Well,
design,
but
but nowhere
yeah.
near the writing. And I do think it is because I've been, these kind of conditions. I've been trained as a designer. I went to school as a designer. Writing is something I've like taught myself. I think you're exactly right.
So I think it has to do, for me, I've been fortunate to be able to write in a certain way. So as I was
Mm,
developing a kind of voice or an attitude that I preferred, um, I had opportunities to have those published. And so
right.
an example is, so after I did the first Emigre, the Looking Closer, I
Mm,
had two opportunities through Rudy he said, one of them was, he just said, I've been getting all these fanzines and all this kind of things. Would you like to write an article
mm.
about these? So he sends me this box of things from all over the world.
Yeah.
So I had this conversation with this box with these zines. And then the other one was a critique, no, a can't remember what it was. Oh yeah, it was for Rick Valacenti's
Mm,
books.
mhm.
This incredible that and something else. But my point there is that in both of those cases, I was able to um, take on these personas, right,
Right.
and write in personas, and that was something I had developed in the graphesis, the
Mm,
thesis thing.
mhm.
So I had the opportunity, things I was just dipping my toe into for the graduate thesis project that I then got to really dive into in these Emigre articles. I wrote so really expanded. So it was sort of this petri dish that I had created
Mhm, mhm.
that then I could take out little bits and grow
Right,
full on
yeah.
things.
I like that.
Um, And that's what I always, when I talk to students about their thesis, they always, I mean, we did it too, right? You just think it's
Mhm.
this grand thing that's one, going to be the worst thing ever, and two, needs to be the best thing
Right,
ever.
right,
So,
right.
little conflict there.
Yeah.
um, versus, what you're doing is you're creating seeds for the next 10 years, then further, because that's going to lead to other things. So
Yeah, that's exactly right.
that's, yeah. Uh, so I did have opportunity to write in voices. I did a couple of early on. I did some writing for like book reviews
Mm, mhm.
or an opinion piece or two for like print
Right.
or
Yeah.
yeah. Um, but I didn't. I don't enjoy those as much.
Mhm, mhm. Well, I have one more question about writing, and then I wanna completely turn and talk about teaching for a bit to take us into the last part of the conversation, but, you mentioned earlier that talking about kind of writing also as a practice. You should do it kind of every day, kind of talking about I'm even thinking about why you didn't like illustration and that kind of the solitude of that and how
Hmm.
writing is that solitude. And I'm interested in how you think about or how you write today. Are you writing every day? Do you have that kind of solitude now again that
Well,
you try
okay,
to get away
so
from?
yeah, and when you say solitude versus like social or collaborating or something, right?
Yeah.
I I do not have the solitude of writing. Anything I'm writing, well, let's see. Anymore of late, I write or discuss with others while I'm writing. So,
Mm, mm, mhm,
um, Gail Swanland and I just did something for Slanted
mm,
that Ian asked us to do. And he had asked her to write it, and then she asked me. We're very close,
okay.
and to so we would collaborate on it. And then it was the best writing experience we've ever had because we're both on the same wavelength in
Mhm,
terms of how establishing that voice. We're now good enough writers that we can do that. We're
mhm,
able to do that, and and so it became this kind of imaginative romp. So she just started out with just jotting down these things, something of it, something of an outline, but not really.
mhm.
Then I would pull something up and write a sentence, and then she'd go, "That's so good," and then she'd write it back,
Yeah,
and we were doing it in a Google Doc, and we
I was gonna say,
crafted
yeah.
something we really love. So and then I told you I'm writing the book with Nita
Mhm,
Abdullah in part because she was a former grad student, because
mm,
I don't want to do it alone.
right.
So yeah, I would say I do not do I do write every day, but I write, I craft emails.
Yeah, yeah,
I work on my syllabus.
right.
Because there's a lot of writing in what I have, what's called the dynamic syllabus. So there's a lot of response that I need to make in there in
Mm,
this space.
mhm,
Um, so I was asked to design. Okay, Benjamin Gatos, who's at Flint. Sorry, lives in Detroit, teaches at Flint.
okay.
They have Flint magazine. He and his wife Julia run Flint magazine. Julia also has another publication that is publishing an essay by Peter Lunenfeld. Peter Lunenfeld and I worked together on Utopian Entrepreneur way back
Mm,
in the day,
mhm.
and then so but Ben, who had seen my dynamic syllabus, said, "I want you to design. Could you does it? We have an essay by Peter Lunenfeld. Do you want to design it in a spreadsheet?"
Oh,
I'm
interesting.
like, "Hell yeah,
Yeah,
yes."
yeah. Huh,
so I contacted Peter,
uh-huh.
and I haven't talked to him in years. So I emailed him and said, "I'm going to do this thing," and now it's going to be more of a collaboration between us.
Okay.
So it's not just me designing it.
Yeah. That's so interesting. I mean, it connects all of these things we're talking about, and because there is this idea of collaboration or you know,
Yeah,
the bringing people together, the kind of social aspect of it, which leads us nicely into teaching, I think, which is perhaps the most collaborative of all of these activities that we're talking about. Um,
hopefully, yes.
yeah,
Not always, but yeah,
in
in an
best
ideal
case
world.
scenario, yeah.
Yeah.
Um, how did you start teaching, and what was it about? How'd you kind of find yourself? That now that is kind of the thing that you do probably the most of, I imagine.
Yes, right. And well, interestingly, it's a nexus for all the things I'm interested in. So
Exactly. Yeah.
it's kind of perfect. Um, it's okay. When did I start teaching? I'm laughing because if my um, if my younger cousin were to say, she'd say, "You started teaching when you were like 7."
Right. Right.
So I even remember, this is a weird, funny thing, but I remember I said, "Okay, Kathy, let's play. We're gonna play school." "Well, okay.
Mm.
And I'm gonna be the teacher." "Well, okay." And then my favoriteest part was writing the lessons and
Mhm.
designing the worksheets.
Right.
So,
Right. Of
I'm
course.
8 years old, like, hello.
Yeah.
I have a friend, I think it's Gail, who said, "Whatever you were doing when you were 7 is what you should probably do for the rest of your
I
life."
was just gonna say that. I feel like I'm the same way. Like, all the stuff that I was doing when I was 7 years old is basically this I'm still just doing the exact same thing.
Great.
It has not changed.
With a little bit of side trip in there,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
on the way. Um, but I taught my first class at Art Center, high school.
Mm.
Art Center has a thing called Saturday High, and this was in that year. I think it was during maybe it was in the last semester, um, of that one year, so it would have been '89. And so that was high school, Saturday High, and then I started teaching Art Center at night, which
Mm.
is, you know,
Mhm.
2 nights a week. So just one class here and there, and I've just always I I've actually frankly never thought about why I like it, but, it's certainly nerve-wracking, like, it's not because I'm an authority.
Yeah.
I think some of it may be um, the social part of it, maybe, it's exciting to introduce to people who really want to know
Mhm.
something.
Mhm. Mhm.
Uh, so the classes, of course, in design at Art Center at night, they were all quite eager because they were trying to get into graduate,
Mm.
the
Mhm.
program. So, it was sort of this nice connection to that aspiration, I guess.
Mhm.
And then, of course, as time has gone on, a lot of, I've taught at all the major, like UCLA,
Yeah.
Otis, CalArts, Art Center, um, just one class, you know.
Yeah.
So I got a lot of different experience, different
Yeah.
kinds of students. Yeah.
I mean, I think you kind of answered it right at the beginning, kind of flippantly. It's the nexus of all of your interests, which is exactly the same for me, and why I have come to like teaching and feel like that's the core of my practice,
Yeah.
as someone who's interested in design and content and writing and yeah, this
And
the
people.
and
Yeah.
people and yeah, seeing people get interested in a subject. I think it's
Yeah.
exactly right. You said something to me. We talked a little bit before, once before, recording this interview, and you said something to me that I've thought about a couple times that I'd like to ask you about, if that's okay, even though
Sure.
that was a not interview conversation. You said something to the effect of that you got into teaching or education not necessarily because you were interested in education, but because you're interested in changing design in some way. Um,
Yes.
could you talk more about what you mean by that?
Yes. Um, when I started teaching, I don't think I had that sense. That
Mm.
was more like, I'm teaching you how to be a designer or how
Mhm.
to prepare to be a designer.
Mhm.
And then over the years, kind of that lost it. I saw the sort of, I'm going to say, I don't want to insult anyone, but that can be soulless, I
Mhm.
think.
Mhm.
In other words, if you're not really developing the person, then
Right.
you're not teaching,
Uh-huh.
in my
Uh-huh.
estimation.
Uh-huh.
So, once I think at some point I really started moving more toward these are human beings, these are people, and I would like I'm just flashing to like in the past. It would have been really brave of me, but interesting to have sat down with students and say, let's propose what chemistry is.
Mm.
And let's
Mhm.
have a conversation about that. And then let's see how wrong or right we are. And that would be in a design class, by the way.
Right. Right. Yeah, yeah. Of course. I got it.
Yeah. So I guess maybe to change design, to answer your question, it's maybe the perception of what it is that designers bring to the world.
Mm,
And the perception is that we bring things, we bring the design world, but that comes from, we tend to think of it more like, let's say it has a manufacturing head and not a culture head.
mm,
Not that manufacturing is a part of culture, but
right.
so let's say more of the human part of it.
Hmm.
Um, so maybe it's to know that a human being can know, who studies design, can know when they go out that they can affect the world,
Yes.
and they can affect the world in a way that only they can.
Yes.
And they can't know that if they're just learning how to do logos. They
Yes.
have to,
Yes.
you have to do that, although I've recently dropped that from the vocabulary, which reminds me too, when my final statement on my, this is totally disconnected, but the final sentence on my application for grad school was "no more logos." This was before Naomi Klein,
Yeah. Yeah.
so it didn't mean the same thing at all.
Right.
I meant it completely differently.
Yeah.
But anyway, so so that people are going out with a way of perceiving the world and a unique ability to change it,
Hmm.
because if they are educated to know that any molecule can be moved with enough money, time,
Hmm.
etc., whatever connections, but that things are
Hmm.
not are not static, and that
Yes.
designers have a capacity to kind of move within that. And in fact, that's what this book is about that I'm working on now, is the uses of things like improvisational, situational, circumstantial um, methods, I guess. Methods, she
Hmm.
said under her breath. Um, uh,
Yeah.
forms of pedagogy,
Hmm.
because
Yeah.
you get at things that are not about designing, but they are about establishing, I guess, ways of designing that are more inclusive.
Yeah, I mean, we can't see each other right now, but I just have a big smile and I'm nodding. I was nodding in agreement over the last, 2 minutes of your answer. I agree with that 100%. It's funny to hear you say that in your graduate application, you said no more logos and that you're kind of dropping that from your vocabulary now. And something I was interested in talking to you about is how design education has changed over your career. And
Mm,
I think one of the big ones, you've already started talking about is this idea of moving away from just kind of training a designer to thinking about the entire person, and this idea of design not as an isolated field,
yes.
but something that affects everything else beyond that. Are there other kind of um, big changes either in content or even methods, and maybe that can kind of lead into the book, but other big kind of evolutions that you've seen as an educator over your time as teaching?
Um, I would I would say maybe that I have seen, but not that has been
Mm,
sort of
mhm,
anything like a groundswell that affected it
mm.
until, there was the designer of 2015, I think, that Meredith Davis and a number of others wrote for AIGA, which was pointing out how required competencies in design are changing, and therefore education should change.
Right.
So I would say that was sort of the start, and then that has evolved now into the designer of 2025 and futures. They call it design futures on
Yeah. Yeah.
AIGA. I would say that's the biggest groundswell, and that's actually something that I'm sort of not negating but resisting,
Mm,
um, wholesale,
okay.
because those discussions are about making design relevant, continuing, so that
Mm,
design remains relevant,
mhm.
and influential,
Mhm.
and that the discipline is more established or more solidified,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
To me, those are these underlying motives under this umbrella or the aegis of transdisciplinary design, right? That's going to
Mhm.
be where. Okay, so I'm not thoroughly against that, although I do think it smacks of post Taylorism. Just
Mhm.
saying.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I think the knowledge that you get that these people are promoting are is very important. I think the capacity to move across and understand and have the skills to collaborate with many different kinds of people is important.
Mhm.
I think that's more developing the person than what they need to know about manufacturing. But um, so I think that's all fine. What these people are not including is is again that individual
Mhm.
who comes to the table with their really interesting set of experiences, and ideally would come to the table with a flexibility, with openness, with expectations for change, knowing that things today are not going to be the same as tomorrow,
Mhm.
but still kind of moving forward and let's see that.
Mhm. Mhm. Mhm.
It doesn't go into those kinds of what I would call design skills, and very particularly design skills. And then also to be able to, within those, so we're talking about sort of circumstances, but then to be able to articulate and make and produce and try or essay
Mhm. Yeah.
in
Yeah.
that process, to me, is sort of being overlooked, and that's, or at least not discussed. So that's what part of why I'm. Well, I don't know that this will have any much impact on anything, but that's what I feel like I want to talk about.
Yeah, and maybe that connects to, the last question that I often ask guests on the show is kind of what they're thinking about now, or where are they, what's next, or what are their kind of interests at this point in their career. And I think, I wanted to kind of tailor that question a little bit to you to hear a little bit more about this book that you're working on about kind of improv and kind of, situational practice. Because I imagine it is what you're thinking about the most, and it connects to what you're just talking about. Can you just to kind of close in on this conversation, talk a little bit about the ideas of this book that you're working on and kind of what your interest is around these ideas?
Yeah. So I think what I just talked about
Yeah.
that was, sort of that was the impassioned conclusion.
Okay.
So to fill in the gaps,
Okay. Yeah. That's a better way to put it.
uh, to fill in the lead in, yeah, or the actual content. So this book emerged because when I have been developing or trying out, I don't know why improv. I think in part trying to find ways where things don't feel so final and
Mhm.
threatening.
Mhm.
Discovering or thinking about and reading about improvisational theater where people together build something. There is nothing, you can't say anything wrong. What they say in improv, there are no mistakes, there are only opportunities.
Right.
Um, and it's collaborative and etc. So that is a sort of general principle informed how to handle critique differently. I had Nida Abdullah was my TA at the time when I introduced this idea of improv critique. And so then, and then she came up with one in that same class called I Wish. And then we had this great sort of dialogue through practicing
Mm.
in the classroom with the students.
Mhm.
And then we both continued to develop this. Once she graduated and then went on to teach, we
Mhm.
both continued to develop this. And so at one point I said, I want to write this book. Do you want to co-author? She said, yeah. So together we have been developing these critiques. So in this book, that's one of the sections is not just improvisational critiques. We've got a bunch of them that we've used, and so that the classroom becomes has been our lab a little bit, and
Mhm,
and we're very open about it with what we're doing with the students and why we're doing it, which is to keep them from locking themselves down forever,
mhm. Uh-huh.
and so the book will also talk about, because we know that a lot of people teach, say, in universities, so you can't just have a free for all in the space. That It's like, how do you structure a course that is more open ended, that includes these kinds of potentials for one, not only to be responsive to whatever happens, but where the students have agency in determining what happens.
Mhm.
Um, so, what are the structures in the classroom? What is the attitudes? We have to change the attitudes of what teachers are. What are you doing? Are you standing at the front of the class? Or are you sitting down in the middle class with everyone?
Mhm.
You have to have
Mhm.
a syllabus that isn't already the Dead Sea Scroll, right? You have to have It has to be
Yeah.
malleable. Students have to be able to add to it. Students collect their own thoughts
Mm.
in it. There's collective thought in the hub. So structures, and then we get into, let's see, structures, critique. I haven't written it yet.
Right, right. I guess we should say, you're in the
Okay.
proposal phase. This is what we're
Yeah,
talking
we're in
about.
the
Yeah.
in the proposal phase. Um, so there's a section on setting up and utilizing the classroom, and
Mhm.
it's a natural place for that.
Mhm.
One on actually structuring the course and allowing students, not allowing, enjoining students to have agency in affecting that. And then project framing, project slash activity framing, like what are the terms, what are things that we've done, and then critique. And the point of this whole book is really it's a provocation. We intend it to be a provocation. It's not a how to.
Mhm.
Sort of, here's what we did, here's what we found, and then mm, ideally provide a philosophical motivation for trying it.
I am someone who in the classroom is kind of interested in all of those things and,
Hmm.
like playing with, today we're all going to sit around a table in class, or,
Yeah.
um,
Sorry, I was going to say that's actually in the structures. We actually talk about the physical space.
yeah, I, I,
And
I,
yeah.
I I think like the space is so interesting. I think, I'm also someone who does all of my syllabi in Google Docs so I can
Yes.
edit as we go. But
Yes.
I never had actually thought about letting the students, comment or something in there. And I'm really interested in all of these ideas, but I don't always know how to actually do them in a way that is beneficial to everyone involved, both the students and me. And so
Yeah.
just hearing you talk about and talking about the kind of philosophical underpinnings of it, I just think is such a great idea and is a, a book that is, this sounds so dramatic, but needed. I think,
Thank you. And I've heard that from other educators as well. And one thing that is important, we use the word practice
mm,
earlier, right? Like
hmm
daily practice.
hmm
Well, the primary idea here is what we're calling practicing.
mm,
So that we think of the classroom as a space for practicing.
hmm
And that what that means is, and if you're talking about teachers and students all being participant
hmm
and all under this idea of practicing, then let's say you're in the classroom and you have an idea and you like, oh, let's try this. That's a form of practicing so
right,
that you're
yeah,
developing it. You don't have to walk in and say, I know, here's what we're going to do today. In fact, I have done improv stuff with I think I did this last semester with my grad students, and it was the kind of thing where they would do something, I would respond to it, we would all respond to it, I would respond to it, next, that becomes information for the next step.
hmm
At one point I felt that there was this kind of people like, what the fuck are we doing?
right, right, right,
I'm sure there were many such points, but
yeah,
the point there is, I had to stand up and say, it's not like I'm back. home or back at my desk and I'm going, hey, 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 I think,
Right.
oh,
Yeah.
now I've got them, oh, they're responding exactly as I had perceived. I thought, the scientific experiment is working. Nothing like that. I said, I don't know what's coming next either.
Yeah.
And that's part of the point. So that's a really hard sell. It's really
Yeah.
hard.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and that's why I'm kind of so excited to read this when you do write it and when it does come out, because in a weird way, I feel like all of these ideas connect to everything else that we've talked about. It is this idea of the social and the collaborative and the practice and the form and the content. It all comes together in this book, which was not planned to end that way, but actually is a nice way to kind of wrap all of this up. This was such a
That's
great
great.
conversation. Thank you so
Oh,
much for
yes.
being on the
No, thank
podcast.
you. It was really great. Thank you so much.
This episode was recorded on March 13th, 2020. Our theme music is by Andy Borgasani. We're on Twitter and Instagram at Surface Podcast. You can find us wherever you get your podcasts and at scratchingthesurface.fm. Thanks for listening.